crisis. So the core humanitarian competency framework, what is that? Well, that's been around since 2010. Before that, there were various humanitarian frameworks, competency frameworks, but in 2010, 15 organisations, mostly international organisations, came together and decided that we need one framework. They actually formed the START network in the end, but at the time they got together, looked at all the different frameworks that existed and identified and agreed some core skills and behaviours that they all felt were essential for staff to display in order for them to be effective in a response. So since then, different organisations have used it in different countries in a huge variety of ways. And last year, UMA did a piece of work to assess its use through the CHCF Alliance, but also supported from START Network again. And the overwhelming response from this piece of work was that yes, it is relevant and it is being used highly effectively as well. So with that in mind, the Alliance, START Network, through the Talent Development Project, and in addition, the Humanitarian Leadership Academy became involved. And the three of us together decided that we were going to take a piece of a project and promote this globally in several different countries. One of the countries is the Philippines, and that is why we're doing the webinar today, and we're going to do the training session later in the month in Metro Manila. So that's that. So I'll pass over to Uma now, and I've given a bit of a background to get into the presentation.
Thank you, Gemma. Just want to sound check again. Gemma, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. So can you see the presentation, Gemma?
Yes.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone once again, and thank you for taking the time off to listen to this presentation. Before I move on, I would like to invite you to reflect on a couple of points. And the first one being, what competencies does your organization need? Either it is core competencies, technical competencies, leadership competencies. What competencies does your organization need? Does it need something different from, let's say, another organization or other partner organization? And in your view, who is responsible or accountable to develop competent staff? Should the staff be responsible to develop their own competencies, or is it the responsibility of the organization? Who is responsible? And finally, why do we need competency-based HR practices? Why not just stick to the conventional HR practices? Why do we need to add more work and add this competency framework, which even sounds a bit daunting? Why do we need competency-based HR practices? So just keep this at the back of your mind as we go on move along with the presentation today. When we ask the question, why do we need competencies, competent staff, you may ask, why do everyone, for that matter, every organization would like to have competent staff. You would like to have a team of competent staff working for you. You would like to have the whole, probably the whole workforce that are competent, but often that is not the luxury that we have, right? So to begin with, you may agree that the actions of the staff are the foundation and basis for effective response. You and I probably would have heard of cases where staff behavior was causing more harm than good in the community. As such, having competent staff, I believe, is not an obligation or a choice. It's a commitment that we as humanitarian organizations should have to provide the most effective service to the affected communities. This, I believe, is also in sync with the localization agenda. For those of you who are familiar with the localization agenda that was announced during the World Humanitarian Summit, where there are so many initiatives underway to enable more local-led responses. Besides, as you know, staff-related costs are often the largest proportion of organizations' costs and most of the program budget. And therefore, investments in staff should be carefully nurtured if they are to yield the best outcomes for the communities. So that's why we definitely need to have competent staff. When we talk about core humanitarian competency framework, and explain when this was developed. The competency framework, it describes the core competencies and corresponding behaviors required for effective response. Now, for the purpose of this particular core humanitarian competency framework, competencies are described as behaviors that employees must have or must acquire in order to achieve high levels of performance in their role, naturally informed by skills and knowledge. So please note that in this regard, when we talk about the core humanitarian competency framework, we are focusing on expected behaviors of employees. There are 6 domains under this core competencies framework, and as I go through these 6 domains, try to reflect, does this competency apply to my own work environment? Does this apply to my context? Can I use this in my organization, or do my staff members require these core competencies? There are about 6 domains under these core competencies. The first one is understanding humanitarian context and applying humanitarian principles and standards. Now, under this domain, there are several other competencies, and basically what this competency domain requires is that all aid workers are to understand operating context, and in this case, if we are talking about Philippines, they should understand the Philippines context, and as you may well be aware, understanding the context in Philippines it varies from different parts of Philippines, and as well as the need to understand key stakeholders and practices affecting current and future humanitarian interventions. And in doing so, it is critical to adhere to the humanitarian principle and standards. I had the privilege of working a little bit in the Philippines during Haiyan, and I did come across quite a number of organizations, as well as quite a number of those working in the humanitarian sector. And it was, in some cases, there were cases where some of the staff have not heard, for example, of cluster mechanism. Some of them are hearing it for the first time and not knowing how to operate. So under this particular domain, it lists some of the behaviors, basic behaviors that are expected of staff in order for them to understand humanitarian context, and that includes understanding cluster mechanism, understanding accountability tools, understanding principles such as humanity, neutrality, and whatnot. So the second domain is achieving results, and this core competency is about aid workers being accountable for their work and use resources effectively to achieve lasting results. And I have to mention that in the core competencies framework, it has 2 tiers. The first tier is applicable to all staff. That means there are some listed behavior, required behavior. And then the second tier is additional behavior if you are manager, if you're holding managerial position. So it's 2-tier approach, right? And then the third competency domain is about developing and managing collaborative relationship. And one of the main challenges, as I mentioned earlier, during humanitarian response is coordination and collaboration. Collaboration with the government, collaboration within organizations, collaboration with partner organizations, collaboration of communities, you name it. So recognizing the need to address this gap, this competency domain aims to develop and maintain collaborative and coordinated relationship with stakeholders as well as staff. So here, this particular domain is not only focusing on external, but it's also focusing on internal coordination, which is sometimes often forgotten. Then you have the other 2 domain, which is operating safely and securely at all times, as well as managing yourself in a pressured and changing environment. Some of you who may have been in the sector for many years, perhaps for 10 years or more, you may notice that 10 years ago, probably there was less mention about safety and security, less mention about duty of care, less mention about staff well-being. All that is changing. Gradually it is changing because there is a recognition that it is so important to pay attention to our most valuable assets, that are the staff. So these 2 particular domains, it really talks about the importance of operating safely and securely at all times, and also how can one manage oneself in a pressured and changing environment. You probably will agree that often working in a disaster, we are in a pressured and changing environment. So the list of behavior required under these domains very clearly states what are the expectations under this particular domain. The last one, the last domain, demonstrating leadership in humanitarian context, this is mainly is to allow demonstration of humanitarian values and principles, and in a way motivate others to achieve results in complex situations. I must say that this particular domain, although it sounds like it's only for leadership, it is not. It's independent of one's role, function, or seniority. So it's more about the leadership competencies, the leadership behaviors, rather than only focusing on those who are in leadership position. So these are the 6 core competencies, and what we have found typically most organizations in one way or the other do find that these competencies are relevant and useful in their own organization. So let's now look at some of the reasons or some of the competency-based HR practices. Why do we need to include competencies in our HR practices? And in this particular project, we are focusing only on 4 areas, although there are other areas that we can add, but we wanted to keep it very simple. So at the moment, we are focusing on planning and organizational design, recruitment and selection, performance development, and then the last one is learning and development. I'll describe briefly how competencies are included under these different stages. So HR planning, as you may recognize, some of you are HR practitioners, is a very crucial step. However, it's often done in an ad hoc manner, or sometimes HR is not even involved in the planning stage. A program manager or the management might come and say, okay, we need X number of staff, please hire. Please do this for us, you know, rather than including HR from the So a competency-based approach to HR planning would typically include the usual steps of planning, however, with the focus of analyzing where there are competencies gaps. So if your organization could already identify these are the competencies that we want to have in our organization now and in the future, the HR planning will allow you to analyze what are the gaps between your future workforce needs as well as the current staffing profile. And based on that, what are the competencies that are missing, and create the plan. And what actions do you need to take to close this gap? And to support in this particular stage, we have developed some tools, and you can see it's listed under the tools section. So we have what we call the organizational assessment tool, talent management and succession plans template, a learning and development plan, as well as competency-based job description, which features how competencies can be included in job description. These are sample tools, templates, as well as questionnaires to allow you or to help you use the competencies. And all these tools are related to the core competencies framework. So if you think that, for example, the organizational assessment, or rather the job description, you don't want to use all the 6 core competencies, you may have other competencies that you want to include, that's perfectly all right. It's just that these tools are just serves as guide. The next one is competency-based recruitment, and if you are HR practitioners, you know how much time one can spend in recruitment and selection, and yet not always getting the right candidate. So one of the highlights of this particular area is that competency-based approach should make the recruitment system fairer and more open, and differences between levels, job titles, and grades are made more transparent. It's also shown that competency frameworks have played a major role in both attracting and retaining staff, particularly when it is linked to career progression and pay. So hiring decisions are made more objectively because you know exactly why you are taking one and not the other, what competencies one is exceeding compared to the other. And under this particular area, we offer the interview questionnaires and reference questions. Interview questionnaire is also based on these 6 domains, competencies that I mentioned earlier. So the interviews are designed based on these behaviors that you're looking for. So for example, one example is working accountably, whether through the interview you will check or you will find out whether the candidate is able to demonstrate if the candidate has worked accountably. So it's not only just the candidate saying, yes, I am accountable, but through the interview with probing questions as well as behavioral based interview, you allow the candidate to give some examples and to provide some clear experiences in terms of how they have demonstrated this accountability. So reference questions here also, in a way, we have developed a tool for you to ask questions around the specific competencies that you are looking for in the candidate. So the next one, competency-based performance management. Basically, I believe some organizations still struggle in terms of measuring the performance, and in our sector, where sometimes it's not so tangible, sometimes quite a lot of the decisions or the activities are influenced by availability, by contact, by stakeholders. So sometimes the performance is not so easily measurable. So in having a competency-based performance management, the focus is very much on the how as well as the what. So it's no longer sufficient for your driver to drive or just drive, but is the driver driving in an effective way? Is the driver respecting all the, let's say, pedestrian, for example? Is the driver able to do his driving in a way that it doesn't affect the image of the organization? So the how part is pretty much the focus under this competency-based performance management. More importantly, it also helps to identify the competencies for effective performance for specific role, and it in a way helps to compare the level of individual performance against the behavioral indicators. So similar tools that we have is a self-assessment tool. This is quite an extensive tool where all the 6 domains are broken into different parts, and under each domain the various behaviors are listed down, and an individual or staff can do an assessment, self-assessment, to see where they are against this behavior. And this is also another additional tool is the competency-based objective. How do you set objectives for competencies? And finally, it's also personal development plan. And the last but not least is competency-based learning and development. For those of you who are HR, and even if you are managers, you may recognize that sometimes training and development is often an area where there is a lot of investment, but not necessarily the impact is measured easily. And quite a number of staff may be attending a lot of trainings, or some may not get any opportunity at all, or they may be attending trainings that may not be relevant to them. So competency-based learning and development pretty much talks about supporting the strategic direction of the organization by developing the skills and competencies needed for the future. So it's not just, randomly attending any training if, someone is saying we pay for you. So it's not necessarily attending training for the sake of attending training, but also having learning and development mechanisms where it is looking at building your gaps in competencies and also getting the future competencies that you need. And when we talk about learning and development, it's not automatically equated to training as such. And as you know, more and more there is a focus on coaching, which is also a very powerful tool to improve performance. So under this particular area, the competencies are developed in terms of informing the training. So for example, if you look at, let's say, the two competency domains on safety and security and working under project environment, and perhaps through the assessment you realize that, my God, quite a number of the staff are not familiar with the safety and security protocols, or quite a number of them are not particularly familiar with the maybe prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse protocols, or they are not familiar with maybe project cycle management or coordination and collaboration. So by having the self-assessment, by looking at the results, you can then identify what specific trainings, what specific learning and development activities are required for that particular staff, and if necessary, develop in-house training or identify training where these competencies can be improved. And not only that, sometimes like any tool, for example, like any tool, the competency framework has its advantages and disadvantages. And one of the major gaps in having tools, in my humble experience, is that it often lacks the socialization or communication about the tool. As HR practitioners or managers, you may have encountered instances where you share certain tool, and yet staff will say, oh, we don't know how to use the tool, or reject the tool, or we don't understand what this tool is all about, or this tool is not relevant. So in the review of the framework that I did last year, the findings clearly suggested that the tool is fine as it is. However, there's a big gap in the how-to. How to use this competency framework, how does it link with other frameworks, how can even organizations start using this competency framework, where is the starting point? So there were quite a lot of questions around how to. So to address that, as Gemma mentioned, we have tried to develop additional tools, and that includes, for example, communication plan. How do you develop a communication plan if you are applying these competencies? How do you inform staff? What kind of training do you give your staff and managers as well in terms of the competencies? And there's also a template and guide about a business case. How can you sell this idea to your management? How can you convince your leadership that competency-based HR practices are very useful and relevant for the organization? How can you even get the management to set aside resources for you to do so? So we have some guide and some templates around that, as well as links to build the core competencies. What are some of the existing trainings that you or your staff could attend in order to strengthen one or the 6 of these competency domains that we mentioned? Sometimes when we look at this competency framework, we find that the behavior, expected behavior, so almost like too perfect behavior, you know, staff are expected to behave in a very, let's say, perfect way, and it is not very clear what are the limiting behaviors, meaning that what are unacceptable behavior. So while the framework focuses very much on acceptable behavior, we thought it will also be useful to have a list of unacceptable behaviors so that managers or the HR managers, HR practitioners can identify during the training or during performance development what are some of these limiting or behaviors that are unacceptable. So that's just to give a bit of comparison between what is acceptable and what is acceptable. Aside that, we also have other references, and all that will be ready, I think, by September. Personally, because I have worked quite a lot with this tool, and I've also spoken to quite a number of agencies that have used the core competencies framework, I think I have definitely seen some positive changes with those who have used the competency framework, but I must emphasize for those who have used it effectively. As I said earlier, it's a tool, and just like any other tool, it also has limitations. So the important part here is on how to use the tool, how to contextualize it, and how to make sure that it fits your needs. And I do believe when used effectively, the benefits outweigh the limitations. And for those of you who have not been familiar with competency framework, I can tell you that it's a daunting task to develop framework from scratch. It's also very costly. I do know of a few organizations who have spent thousands of money to develop competency framework, but in the end it was not used properly because it was not well accepted, or the socialization of the competency framework was not done properly. And some organizations use consulting firm or consultants to develop such kind of competency framework. So here we are offering you a free tool to support the professionalization of the sector. And also, as I mentioned earlier, organization can start small by selecting certain HR practices that they want to change, and it is also to help organization identify training intervention to bridge gaps in capacity, and more importantly, it is also to sharpen organizations' ability to deliver against its goal. And I have seen that when behaviors, expectation of competencies are clearly articulated to staff, it fosters a strong feedback and development culture on staff behaviors. Staff becomes very clear, this is what we are expected to behave and how we are expected to behave, and these are the competencies that we are lacking, and this is how we should achieve, and this is what the organization is looking for, so that these competencies help the organization to achieve its goal, mission and vision as well. So finally, in addition to these specific tools that I have mentioned, we are currently in the process of producing the following. For those of you who have not seen the competency framework, Gemma will be more than happy to share you the version soon enough. We will bring it along to Manila when we come on the 20th for the training. And this competency framework is available in English, French, Bengali, Tagalog. And along with that, we have a small, a brief how-to guide for users. That means it describes how you can use this competency framework in the different areas, how it can be linked to other competencies framework, as well as a little bit of how can you communicate or socialize these competency framework to the rest of the organization. In addition to that, we will also produce, or in the midst of producing, training modules, and this will only be available in English. These training modules basically covers the different areas I mentioned earlier: recruitment, selection, performance development, coaching, and whatnot. And if the need is very clear in specific areas, and if in the training you indicate certain needs, and if the needs fits with our plan also, we will be more than happy to develop these other additional training modules. We are also at the moment working on an introductory video introducing the competency framework, and this will be available in English. Between now and September, Gemma, myself, and another colleague of ours, Samantha Wakefield, we will be available to provide any technical assistance to organizations that want to adopt the competency framework or some parts of the competency framework. And I will let Gemma speak a little bit more about this technical assistance. So all in all, what does this competency framework aim to achieve? It recognizes and understands at the end of the day, in years to come, because changing behaviors really do take time, we do hope that organizations will recognize and understand that the behaviors, just a second, and recognize and understand the behaviors that is needed for high standard of performance in the humanitarian sector, because the community deserves it. It also helps to clarify expectation of staff on behaviors related in a consistent and objective way. And what I have seen also during the review, it creates a shared language across agencies about what is expected of staff and organizational performance. And what is beautiful about this is if some of the competencies are common across the sector, it's also transferable. So for example, if in your organization you are paying attention to, let's say, safety, security, you're paying attention to some of these competencies you've mentioned, in other organizations, when someone moves, they bring along these competencies, and there is no need to develop this competency from scratch because it is a sector-wide competencies. These are the basic competencies we require to perform effectively in the sector. Finally, the hope is that it strengthens professionalism among humanitarian staff and organizations to better support crisis-affected people. What I really like about this competency framework is the additional behaviors required of managers in terms of managing staff, in terms of managing resources, in terms of operating safely and securely, in terms of demonstrating leadership. That is also, in a way, focuses on the importance of managers doing their part as managers to develop competent staff. So personally, as I said, I'm quite excited and quite convinced that this competency framework, if used properly, will bring a lot of benefits to the organization as well as the staff. So this particular competency framework, it aims to achieve quite a number of things. So I'm going to leave you with this particular question. What do you aim to achieve when it comes to staff competencies? With that, I'll hand it over to Gemma. I do apologize, I don't sound like one of your favorite radio DJs, but I'll let Gemma take over and take a bit of a rest and take a drink now. Gemma?
Hi, Uma. Thanks for that. That was absolutely brilliant. Very informative indeed. We don't have any questions. Actually, we do have one question from Carol, who's asking, can we get this session, has it been recorded? Yes, it has been recorded, although I just remembered a few minutes in to do that. So you will miss the beginning, but what I'll do is I'll send you a bit of a summary email post this session, and in there there'll be the link where you can go in and listen to the recorded version if you feel like you need to share it with staff, which I hope you will do. So do we have any other questions about anything that Uma's just spoken about? And if you don't have any questions, I guess I might have a couple of questions for you. Firstly, oh, here we go. We've got one about accessing the technical assistance. So if you are interested in embedding the framework and you would like assistance from myself and Uma before the training or even after the training, just drop me an email. Let me know what you're thinking, and this is something we can figure out. There will be some time before the training and the days before the training where we can meet face-to-face, and then after that it'll be remote support that we can offer. So please do just drop me an email to let me know how you're thinking of putting this framework into your organisation and how you think we can help, and hopefully we can work on that together.
Gemma, sorry Gemma, would you like to explain maybe a little bit more what kind of technical assistance we are talking about?
Yeah, so we can, we would be happy to. We're looking at all the 4 different areas, starting with organisational design and planning. We'd be happy to go through with you your existing plans and then look at how the competencies could be brought in there. So it'd be a two-way conversation. We'd look at what competencies might be relevant to your organisation, because not all of, you don't have to take all 6 of the competencies. Some might not be relevant to particular operations that you're doing. So we'd look at that, figure out which ones are relevant, and then we'd try and understand how we could bring that into your organisational design and the strategy through your different existing documents and policies. Within recruitment and selection, we can help you to identify, so actually if we look at assessment of capacity of the staff, we can look at doing a capacity assessment through self-assessment, so we can identify what areas in the team are missing, which domains aren't covered very strongly within the skill set of your existing staff. From that, we can make a capacity development plan. So what areas, where do we need to add training? But also we can look at what new talent you need to bring in. And then we can make sure the job descriptions have it scattered through these different competencies in the relevant areas to make sure that as you do recruit, you recruit in the capacity that you're lacking in terms of behaviours and skills, not just technical skills, but actually these core competencies, these core behaviours. So that's another thing we can do. Additional to that, I'm just trying to think on my feet now, Uma. Maybe you'd want to add to that. Uma, are you still there?
No, yeah, I'm there. Sorry, I was on mute. I think that's all, Gemma. I think in addition, if necessary, we can do a bit of orientation session for the staff, either by webinar, if necessary, to introduce the competencies, the usefulness of competencies, and as Gemma mentioned, review some of the job description and have to include some competencies. But I think the important thing is to make sure that you folks identify which competencies are relevant and useful for your organization.
I was just thinking also that, yeah, we can look at the processes, policies that you have in existence and make sure that the competencies are linked through that. We also can help you figure out a plan of how to introduce this to your organisation. So that's touching on the communication plan that we spoke about, putting together a business case. So how to approach this in the right way, because it is key that you get senior management and management to understand it and to buy into it. Okay, so we do have a question. Again, this is from Carol, who's asking, in an emergency, we have to provide support to affected people timely and quickly. So what process should follow for HR? So I think actually, if I can find you, I'll take you off mute and allow you to speak, if I can. Let's see. Or can you take yourself off mute, Carol? There you go. Okay, hopefully if you can take yourself off mute, you're happy to add to this. But Uma, would you have any ideas on how the processes that we're talking about or the tools that we're talking about could help?
Sure. I think it's a very million-dollar question, isn't it, Carol? In an emergency, it's always time is of an essence and speed is definitely of an essence. And getting the right people at the right time to serve, to support the affected people is often the challenge. I think with a competency-based approach, or even for any HR for that matter, planning in advance is very important. And in using competencies-based approach, it helps organization to think through well before the disaster, during preparedness time, what kind of people do we need? Because often you know which areas you may want to intervene, you may want to support, and you know typically in a disaster how things operate, what is the operation contact. So probably one idea would be to encourage organizations and management to identify in advance the competencies that you require should there be an emergency response. And in my experience, often HR processes sometimes are criticized because it takes a long time to get someone on board. There are quite a number of shortcuts but not compromising quality in terms of hiring, in terms of getting people on board, in terms of orientating staff during emergency. And these tools are available in the CHS Alliance website, Carol, if you're interested. So if typically hiring someone takes about, let's say, 1 month or 2 months, 6 weeks or so during emergency, some of these steps can be made shorter in the interest of serving the affected people, but not compromising the quality.
Thanks, Uma. We've got a question from Nova, which is the hot topic that's often brought up in our workshops, about how does the framework adjust behaviour of permanent staff? So dealing with staff that are potentially not performing in their role, or maybe they are performing, but likely this question is heading towards people that aren't performing. And we have heard before that in the Philippines that there is quite strong employment law around staff staying in roles. So I think this probably could be an area that we could add to. I think we'll take this as the last question because we are slightly over. So Uma, if you wanted to just briefly answer that question, what tools you think could address this, and then we'll look to finish.
Yeah. I think really, I think it's a very interesting question that how does it address a behavior of permanent staff or current staff, existing staff? It seems maybe it works well when you're hiring new staff, but the tools that we have, it also helps for you to look at existing staff. For example, permanent staff, if you're talking specifically about permanent staff, self-assessment tool. If you have identified the core competencies that are critical for your organization, by doing a self-assessment, you can actually measure or you can identify what are the gaps in permanent staff, what are the competencies that are missing. So from there, as HR manager or as management can decide and can help to strengthen or improve some of these competencies. And as I said, it's not only through training, but through different mechanisms, you know, and sometimes if it includes disciplinary action, then disciplinary action it is, because some behaviors are definitely not compromised. So that would be my take on addressing behavior of permanent staff or existing staff or long-term staff whose behavior sometimes is very difficult to change because they've been there for very long years. Gemma, which other questions? There are quite a number of
I think there's one there from Sholi who's highlighting Transform and Surge project. And this is something we are aware of. We came up in Bangladesh when we were there, and we, the Alliance, do work on that project, and we are hoping to make some sort of collaboration with you. So hopefully we can talk about this more when we're in Manila, because there's definitely ground there for overlapping in the work that we're doing. And then we've got a question about understanding context to recruit new staff. And I think that one is what we're going to be focusing on when we're looking at, when we're doing our training in Manila. So we won't answer that one just yet to keep your appetites up. So the details for the day on the 20th, I will send them through shortly. Sorry, can you remind me, which office do we think it's going to be in now? Was it ACF?
I'm not so sure.
Oh no, it's CARE. Sorry, it's CARE. We think it's going to be in the CARE office, but I will confirm that very soon. I'm working with the Depth Learning Project because we're doing it in collaboration with them, but that hopefully will be confirmed in the next day or so, and I will send through all the details. I'd ask everybody that, there you go, CARE, it's been confirmed from Diane, thank you. If you could please just put your full name and email address into the chat box if you haven't already put your name in, then I know that you've attended and I can make sure that you do get the details, the follow-up details in the, to the training day. I will also send through the framework when I respond to you. So just to reiterate, the focus will be on recruitment and selection, so using competencies. We will have a chat at the beginning of the session and try to tailor it as much to the need in the room. If there's anything that you wanted to highlight to me on email that you think would be useful to cover in that session from your point of view, absolutely fine and very welcome. At the moment, we're probably going to be looking at STAR technique, correct questions to ask, and the sort of answers that you're looking for, and then how you rate them, and then how that folds into the whole overall process as well. And we're also going to be looking at capacity assessment of your staff. So through using the self-assessment, so you can look at what capacity building plans you might need to put together. So those are the two areas, but really welcome to feedback and to suggestions to extend that. It's your session, so you know we just want to deliver to what you need really. Okay, so I think without further ado, I'm going to stop the session now. I'd just like to say thank you to you all for taking the time. I'm sorry we've gone over slightly, but this is the first time we've run it, so our timings will be perfected in the next session, I'm sure. So thank you for bearing with us, and we really look forward to seeing you all soon in Manila. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma.